Hello. Dr. Joseph Schwartz is director of the McGill University Office for Science and Society. If you are among the many who are familiar with Dr. Schwartz, you probably associate him with rubber duckies and magic tricks. If you're not familiar with him, I encourage you to get on the mailing list of his Office for Science and Society. You will not regret it. Not only will you appreciate his rubber duckies, you will learn about modern day snake oils, the history of chemistry, magic tricks, and much more from his illuminating and entertaining videos. His Office for Science and Society also creates position papers on health concerns and policies. It is dedicated to demystifying science and separating sense from nonsense. It has an impressive and frequent presence on Canadian television and radio. As for Dr. Schwartz himself, he has authored 14 bestsellers, has won numerous academic awards, and has been awarded honorary degrees. It is an honor and a privilege for me to introduce Dr. Joe Schwartz.
Thanks very much for that introduction. Just one little correction. My duckies mostly are polyvinyl chloride, although I do have a number of rubber ducks, and more about that later.
Okay.
As you mentioned, I direct McGill University's Office for Science and Society, a rather unique venture, because we have the mandate to separate sense from nonsense. And of course, there are a lot of people these days who work in this area of, providing information to the public. I think we are the only university-based such enterprise. And these days, it is really needed because we are confronted by a tsunami of quackery. And while we associate, snake oil with the late 1800s and maybe the early 1900s, the fact is that snake oil is very much alive today. And our task is to basically counter the snake oil salesman and replace what they say with proper science. We do this without any conflict of interest. We do not accept any money from any vested source. We are totally funded by the university. So it makes no difference to me or to my staff whether or not any food or cosmetic or medication is regulated or not. The only thing that matters is that whatever decision is arrived at is based on proper scientific principles, not on hearsay and not on emotion. My fictional hero is Sherlock Holmes. And there's good reason for that. He, of course, was the world's premier scientific detective. But the reason that I gravitate towards Holmes is because of the quote that he made. It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts. And this is something that I think is very important to remember these days when we are in the midst of an information explosion. It is coming at us from TV, from radio, from every kind of conceivable media. And indeed, we are living in the age of information. Unfortunately, it is also the age of misinformation. Now, misinformation is information that is just wrong. Sometimes it is rather easy to identify. For example, I think we would all accept that the Earth is not flat, despite what the Flat Earth Society maintains. But obviously, we have plenty of evidence to prove that they're wrong. And then, of course, there are the tabloids and their headlines, which are easy to identify as being total nonsense, albeit, somewhat entertaining. However, it is not always so easy to know whether information is misinformation or not. For example, the story of hydroxychloroquine, which of course was a medication that had been previously used to treat malaria. But when COVID came around, there were people, including former president, who promoted its use against COVID-19. And many people bought into that. They didn't know whether or not the information was real or it was misinformation. But when experiments were carried out and trials performed, it became very clear that now we can close the curtain on this rather bizarre episode, because there is absolutely no evidence that hydroxychloroquine works against COVID-19. And of course, what we look for in science is evidence. In addition to misinformation, there's another category which is perhaps even more worrisome, and that is disinformation. And this is when people knowingly spread misinformation. Admittedly, it is not always easy to tell whether the purveyors of the misinformation know that they are doing that, or whether they are just sort of, seconding other people's opinions. Well, let me take on an example where I think it really is disinformation, where the spreaders know what they are doing. When you watch TV at night, you'll be accosted on numerous occasions with ads for Prevagen, a substance that is claimed to improve memory and is said to be the #1 pharmacist recommended brand. Well, there's absolutely no evidence for it being the #1 pharmacist recommended brand, but that's not the issue here. And if you watch these ads on TV, you'll hear this particular statement: you might take something for your heart, your joints, your digestion. So why wouldn't you take something for the most important of you, your brain, with an ingredient originally found in jellyfish? Healthier brain, better life. So goes the ad. But what about this jellyfish business? What they are talking about is a protein that is actually found in jellyfish, apoacarin, and it is a calcium binding protein. And they will, on their website, give you some very scientific sounding information about this particular protein that makes the jellyfish glow, and that we also have a very similar protein in our brain, and that when we have buildup of calcium in the brain, it can damage nerve cells, and this protein can prevent that damage. Well, this essentially is a lot of gobbledygook. Apoacarin is a protein which is readily digested, so it gets degraded in the digestive tract. So even if it had some value, it couldn't do it orally. It would have to be injected into the bloodstream. A further nuance here is that this protein that they talk about, which is found in jellyfish, is actually not extracted from jellyfish. It is synthesized in the laboratory. Of course, that's neither here nor there, but they don't make any mention of this. So where do they get the information that it can improve memory, healthy brain function, sharper mind, and clearer thinking? They do this by engaging in something that we call data mining. When you carry out some study and the data is not according to your liking, then you will tend to torture that data until it surrenders. This is called data mining, and it usually consists of taking a very, very close look at the data and parsing it into little bits until you find something that actually is meaningful. So they actually did carry out a double-blind study, which, according to their own paper, and this is the only paper that they've published, said that there was no statistically significant result when observed over the entire study population. However, when they parsed the study population, they looked at some subgroups, they were able to find one in which there was a difference. And this was a group where people had only extremely mild memory impairment. Anyway, numerous researchers have looked at this and have dismissed this as being meaningful. And the fact is that there's just no evidence that Prevagen works. And their claims have also been challenged legally. And just recently, in May of this year, the Attorney General James in New York State won a trial against Quincy Bioscience, the manufacturers of this, and asserted that this was really deceptive and fraudulent advertising. Now, the reason I put this into the disinformation category is because I think for the researchers who accumulated this data, they had to know that it was only by mining the data and finding this small subfraction where there was any kind of positive result. They knew what they were doing. So I think this really is in the category of disinformation. But when it comes to information, disinformation, misinformation, the basic question that we have to ask to know the truth is, to whom do we listen? Now, those of us in the scientific realm have no problem answering that question. We say we listen to the peer-reviewed published literature. This is the altar at which we scientists worship. Admittedly, perhaps too fervently, because of course peer review is not set in stone. Humans are humans. They will make mistakes, and they will carry out fraudulent pieces of research, as of course we well know now Andrew Wakefield, who published that dreadful paper in The Lancet that linked autism to vaccination. That got a pass. It got into the literature because, of course, the referees cannot repeat the work. They have to assume that whatever was submitted the work was properly done. And it is only when someone tries to repeat the work and finds that it's not repeatable that we get the truth. And sometimes that can take decades, as it did in this case. And by that time, the damage had been done. There were epidemics of measles that we had not seen for ages. So anyway, in science, we go by the peer-reviewed literature. It is not perfect, but is the best way to convey information. However, when it comes to the public, the story is different. They don't read the scientific literature because, of course, they generally don't have access to it. And it is usually written in a way that is not easily understandable by members of the public who don't have strong scientific background. So they tend to get their information these days from the social media. Let me give you an example. They may go for dietary advice to the food babe, who coined this expression herself, which also says something. She has no scientific background at all in the area of nutrition or health, and yet she persists in giving all kinds of nutritional advice, such as, if you can't pronounce it, you should not be eating it. She advises consumers to read the ingredients on their foods and cosmetics, and they should not be using it if they can't pronounce it. So certainly, if she would come across beta-fructofuranosyl alpha-D-glucopyranoside on the label of a product, she would recoil in horror and tell everyone that they must stay away from this commodity, which just happens to be the chemical name for sugar. Now, there are a number of very good reasons to curb our intake of sugar. There's, of course, massive literature on that, on the contribution of sugar to obesity, the contribution of sugar to various metabolic diseases. So, of course, we should be cutting down on sugar, but not because its chemical name is multisyllabic. She also asks whether or not we should be eating beaver butt. Well, that's a rather curious question. Most of us do not go hunting for beavers, and you will not see beaver butts being sold in supermarkets. So how does this come about? Beavers have a gland near their anus, not the anus, but near their anus. And through this gland, they release a bevy of chemicals, with which they mark their territory. Collectively, these compounds are called castoreum, and they can be purchased mostly because they are used in the perfume industry. In a very dilute solution, they tend to have a pleasant smell. They also have a raspberry vanilla-like flavor. And indeed, it is a safe substance. It could be used in food products, it's allowed, but of course it would never be used in a food product because it is very, very expensive. The perfume industry can do that because they just use a little bit, dilute it, and they make their perfume. But this mixture of compounds called castoreum, which has sort of like a vanilla flavoring, in theory, could be used to flavor vanilla ice cream. But practically speaking, it would never be used. Why? It is far too expensive. So no, there is no beaver butt or beaver butt extract in your vanilla ice cream. Nevertheless, the food babe has built a case around this, suggesting that you might not want to taste vanilla ice cream because it is tainted with beaver butt extract, but it is just nonsense. The compound that is used in vanilla ice cream these days usually is not natural vanilla, which is an extract of the vanilla bean that grows on an orchid, because that's very expensive. It is actually vanillin, which is synthesized commercially, and it is a well-known synthesis that starts out with lignin that is extracted from wood. So that's what is in vanilla ice cream. Now, in theory, beaver butt extract, as she calls it, does have a vanilla-like flavor, so it could be in ice cream, and it would actually be legal to do that, but no one ever does that. And even if they did, they would not be anything to worry about. It's a perfectly safe substance. So she confuses people. And yet, this lady, who has no scientific background whatsoever, is asked to appear on network television as an expert on things like trans fats. And she would, of course, be totally incapable of drawing the structure of a trans fat or knowing what the difference is between a trans fat or a cis fat. She has been named one of the most influential people on the internet by Time magazine. And that is really a pretty scary business, that someone who has no scientific background gives scientific advice on a massive scale. And she has millions of followers. I'm not one of her followers. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. I mean, I do follow her to know what it is that she is saying, not to abide by it. And because I've seen the nonsense that she spreads, I thought that she should learn some basic chemistry. So I took the opportunity to send her a book. In fact, I sent her 2 books. I sent her this one, Chemistry for Dummies, and this one, Chemistry for the Utterly Confused. I never got a thanks for this, but I hope that she at least read parts of these books to edify herself, although judging by what I see on her website, there's no evidence that she has done that. She is not the only non-scientist to be spreading confusing scientific information. Gwyneth Paltrow is another one. A very, very good actress. I've always enjoyed her movies. But when she says that every nutritionist, doctor, and health-conscious person that she's ever come across concurs that gluten is tough on the system and many of us are best intolerant of it or allergic to it, this is just not true. Of course, there is such a thing as gluten sensitivity, celiac disease, and these people have to scrupulously stay away from gluten, but for the vast majority of the population, there's no problem with gluten. Then she gives us further advice about oregano oil, that it can ward off colds, and magnesium pills to ensure sleep, and that spraying with colloidal silver staves off germs, and that this particular Japanese radish is good for stomach aches. None of this is based on scientific evidence. But of course, her platform is gigantic. And again, there are millions of people who abide by her advice because people think that if someone is famous, if they're a celebrity, they must know what they're talking about. They must have inside information. They don't. There are many others with no scientific background who try to tackle the problems of science. And one of the most irksome creatures is Anthony William, who labels himself the medical medium. And he has written a number of books that have made it onto the New York Times bestseller list. This gentleman has zero scientific background, and yet he has a radio show where he gives out scientific, specifically medical advice. Where does he get this advice? Well, apparently from a spirit. He has a direct conduit to the spirit world, and he gets advice from a physician, or at least the spirit of a physician. This is how he gets away, by what really amounts to practicing medicine without a license, because the advice doesn't come from him, it comes from the spirit world. He's just a conduct to the spirit world. And what does this medical spirit advise the medical medium to tell people to do? No matter what they suffer from, the advice almost always is to drink celery juice. And if you look at his books, he will tell you about everything that celery juice can do, from restoring your adrenals to neutralize, flushing out toxins from the liver, etc. None of this has any scientific basis. He will not tell you that the nitrates that are found in celery juice in the body can convert to nitrosamines, which are carcinogenic. Now, of course, we know this in chemistry, and this is the kind of thing that I try to, emphasize in my books. I talk about things like, why nitrates are sometimes problematic, other times perhaps not, because they also convert to nitric oxide in the body, which has a vasodilating effect. Anyway, it's a complex issue. And when I actually wrote this book, I was very happy when my publicist called me and told me that made it onto the bestseller list. So I perused that bestseller list, and indeed there I was at number 9 with a grain of salt. I was very happy. It's a good thing to make a bestseller list. But then I glanced further up this bestseller list, and I saw that at number 5, it was Anthony William, and he also appeared at number 6. So I was outdone by the gobbledygook of this guy, and just goes to show you that nonsense very often trumps sense in the world of science. Well, moving on from Anthony William, let's make a brief stop with Madonna, who believes that she knows how to neutralize radiation. And she's supposedly up to date on how to handle nuclear waste. Well, I doubt that she would be able to tell you what nuclear waste is. And then we have Tom Cruise, who thinks that psychiatry doesn't work. And when you study the effect, it's a crime against humanity. Well, psychiatry, of course, is a field of medicine, which is absolutely science-based. Obviously, there are legitimate questions that can be asked about the practice of psychiatry, but to suggest that it doesn't work is absolute nonsense. Tom Cruise, of course, is a Scientologist, and that, of course, is a very humorous kind of belief. And then we have Naomi Campbell, one of the world's leading models, who believes that it is good to clean out your body once in a while. And as soon as you see the term detox in any of these ads, well, you can just flip away, because the body has its own detox mechanisms. We call them the liver and the kidneys. That's how we get rid of toxins. But the people who talk about these detoxing regimens without ever mentioning what specific toxins they are getting rid of, this is just meaningless, but it gives people simple answers to complex problems, and that is often what people are about. Well, the non-scientist comments go far afield from actors and models to political commentators like Candace Owens, who is a big deal in the podcast world, in the social media world. She has over 6 million followers. Well, you know, when I take a look at some of the stuff that she says, I can dismiss it very easily, because as soon as I see that she believes that the moon landing was fake, it calls into question everything else that she says, because you can't rely on anyone who believes that the moon landing was fake. This is just total nonsense. She also tells us that global warming is not real. It is indeed very real. And we see the strange weather patterns that people around the world are now experiencing because of global warming. She has also said that Bill Gates is a vaccine criminal. Obviously, she's an anti-vaxxer. But then she goes on to say even more disturbing things, such as the fact that Mengel's medical experiments were just bizarre propaganda. That is, the claim that Mengele carried out these experiments was just bizarre propaganda. No, Mengele carried out these experiments. And unfortunately, I know this firsthand because my aunt was one of his victims in Auschwitz in 1945. And it's offensive to hear someone like Candace Owens saying that Mengele's experiments were just bizarre propaganda. Now, not only political commentators say strange things, so do actors like Terrence Howard. Now, as soon as someone is a celebrity, which he certainly is, because he's been in a number of movies, you just see a partial list there. He's in fact been in more movies than that. And I think he's a reasonably good actor. But that does not qualify him to comment on scientific issues as he did on the Joe Rogan Experience. Well, Joe Rogan, of course, is really a former comedian who isn't really equipped to handle scientific issues. So when Terrence Howard was on there telling people that 1 × 1 = 2 because the square root of 4 is 2, so what's the square root of 2 should be 1, but we're told it's 2 and that cannot be. Hard to know what to make of a statement like that. It's totally meaningless. He also says that he can remember the day he was born. Well, that would indeed be a miracle. And then this business about all energy in the universe is expressed in motion. All motion is expressed in waves. All waves are curves. So where does the straight lines come to make the platonic solids? There are no straight lines. So when I took the flower of life and opened it properly, I found whole new wave conjugations that are exposed in between spaces. Hard to know what to make of this, but it can sound sort of pseudoscientific to someone who doesn't have a background in science, as his comment that he'll build the planet Saturn without gravity. I don't know how he proposes to do that, and the Milky Way galaxy without gravity. So he was on there spouting this set of bizarre statements, and Joe Rogan eventually thought that, well, you know, he should be confronted by a proper scientist, and especially after, you know, Terrence Howard had said that he had refused the vaccine because of the government's history of chemical warfare against its citizens. Well, the government doesn't have any chemical warfare plots against its citizens. But anyway, Joe Rogan finally asked a legitimate scientist, Harvard-educated mathematician Eric Weinstein, to appear. And indeed, he did destroy most of Terrence Howard's statements, but not all. In a very strange way, Weinstein concluded that maybe there is something to some of the stuff that he says, that, you know, there are more things in our philosophy than have ever been thought of, to misquote Shakespeare. But anyway, I thought that it was kind of strange that Weinstein actually gave credence to some of the stuff that Terence Howard was saying, sort of saying, well, maybe we shouldn't be throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Well, I don't think there's much wisdom in this particular baby. People also pay a great deal of attention to what athletes say because they think they're famous, therefore they must know. One of the best examples of this, of course, is Tom Brady. Probably the greatest quarterback in history. I'm not going to contest that. But that doesn't mean that we should just sort of buy hook, line, and sinker things he said about nutrition and the so-called T2 method. This is a book about his experiences and how he used, quote, science in order to better his performance. I certainly read through the book. Much of it, unfortunately, is quackery. And I think Brady totally drops the ball when it comes to science, especially when he talks about the alkaline diet and that this is going to make you become a champion. Well, one could, of course, go on and give a whole lecture on this business of alkalinity. The fact is that the body's blood is maintained at a pH of about 7.35. And should it wander away from that, it would be a catastrophic situation. The body's blood is a buffered solution. If it becomes too alkaline, the body will secrete acids to neutralize it and vice versa. But the proponents of the alkaline diet claim that somehow, if the body becomes too acidic, that is conducive to poor health. Well, the body doesn't become too acidic unless there is some health issue, such as diabetes. But suggesting that eating an alkaline diet is going to balance your body's pH is just nonsense. The body can balance its own pH. And furthermore, nothing that you put into your stomach is going to have an effect on the chemistry of the blood. It might change the pH of the urine, but not the pH of the blood. Now, that being said, the alkaline diet is mostly a diet that is based on lots of fruits and vegetables and whole grains. There's nothing wrong with the diet, but there's something wrong with suggesting that if you eat an alkaline diet, you can beat cancer, and that this is the best diet to eat because it will keep your body's pH constant, which is just nonsense. And Brady also tells us that he used to take a supplement called NeuroSafe, seatbelt for the brain, clever wording there, because in football, of course, you are often exposed to the possibility of injury to the brain, concussion, and that this somehow is protective. There's zero evidence for this. Now, he is not the only quarterback to have waded into the sea of pseudoscience. Aaron Rodgers has done that as well. He told us that he was immunized by homeopathy. Total nonsense. And then, of course, there's Alex Reed, an ultimate fighting champion in England, who believes that it is actually very good for a man to have unprotected sex as long as he doesn't ejaculate. Why? I believe that all that semen has a lot of nutrition. Tablespoon of semen has your equivalent of steak, eggs, lemons, and oranges. I am reabsorbing it into my body, and it makes me go raw. Hopefully for our audience here, this requires no further comment. Shaquille O'Neal thought that the power bracelet gave him more energy and flexibility. This is the power bracelet. It's a piece of plastic with sort of a holographic image of it. It does absolutely nothing. But even David Beckham believes in it. Now, these are actors and politicians, and one can, of course, excuse them for not having a background in science. But what about physicians? Excuse me. They, of course, should follow the scientific method. How is it that some of them can go astray, such as Dr. Kerry Madej, an osteopathic physician who believed that the COVID vaccine was an experiment on humanity and that one should engage in detoxing if one has been vaccinated against one's will, and the ingredients that were needed would be baking soda, Epsom salts, bentonite, clay, and borax. And you take a bath in this to detox yourself from the nasty chemicals in the vaccine. This, of course, gave great fodder to cartoonists about borax bath detoxing, etc. Obviously, this is ridiculous, but she is not the only one to have promoted such nonsense. Dr. Madej has been joined by the likes of Dr. Christian Northrup and Lee Merritt and Sherry Tenpenny. And of course, COVID-19 made these people come out of their closet, their scientific closet, and provide all kinds of silly information. Dr. Sherry Tenpenny explained that the vaccine was actually formulated to depopulate the world. And not only did it do that, it also made people magnetic. And she actually gave a talk in front of a group in a sort of a legal setting, where she said that the vaccine magnetized people. They put a key on their forehead and it sticks. Well, I'll do that. I can put a spoon on my nose and it will stick. And it is not because I had the vaccine, which of course I did have, because this can be done by some very simple trickery. But the idea that a coin will stick to you because you've been vaccinated is absolute nonsense. Yeah, if you press a coin to sweaty skin, it may actually stick for a little bit. Nothing to do with vaccination. So, but these people like Kerry Madej and Pennyworth, these are not huge players when it comes, to the media. But certainly Dr. Oz is. And he is sort of an enigma. Properly trained and apparently a very competent cardiac surgeon. And he used to be a guest on Oprah's television show where he would, tell people to exercise and eat broccoli. And that was all good. And then Oprah made him God, gave him his own TV show. And at first, it was very good. He walked people through models of the intestine, explained how it worked, explained how the lungs functioned. And then they recognized that their audience was mostly middle-aged, overweight American women who were looking for help. So Dr. Oz was willing to provide that. And he started to talk about raspberry ketones and suggesting that raspberry ketone causes fat cells to release adenopectin, tricking the body into thinking it is thin. Well, again, there are some laboratory experiments about adenopectin, but there is not a single study in humans that shows any weight loss with raspberry ketone. Nor is there any evidence that green coffee bean extract is the answer to weight loss. And in fact, the company that manufactured this was taken to court by the Federal Trade Commission because they had been making claims that were not justified. And the product was based on seriously flawed study. Of course, Dr. Oz never mentioned that. Where I became truly disenchanted with Dr. Oz was when he introduced his viewers to his homeopathic starter kit. Now, I don't think I have to talk too much about what homeopathy is to this particular audience. I think most people are familiar with it. It involves diluting a substance that in a healthy person would cause symptoms of disease, diluting it excessively, and claiming that it will cure symptoms of people who have that disease. Anyway, what we know is that after a 12C dilution, that is, you take 1 drop, dilute it with 99 drops, take 1 drop, 99, etc., 12 times, that after this, all you have left is just water. Then they take a drop of this water and impregnate it into a sugar pill, and then you have the whole homeopathic materia medica, as it is called. Some of it is really bizarre. I don't know how you go about diluting an X-ray, but they apparently know how to do that. And this is a homeopathic remedy that relieves itching and skin rash aggravated at night and in bed. I suppose if you have skin rash during the day, you better reach for something else, because then you'll have excess anxiety. And you might then want to take Berlin wall extract because it reduces anxiety. Why? Well, according to the homeopathic argument, in a healthy person, the Berlin Wall induces anxiety, undoubtedly true. And therefore, in an anxious person, it will reduce anxiety. Amazing gobbledygook. There's also homeopathic castoreum, believe it or not. That's the same stuff that we talked about in the beaver gland extract. But in this case, it has, as they say, a long-standing reputation for efficacy in treating hysterical symptoms, nervous affections. Why? Because I assume the scent of castoreum may make you anxious. So therefore, it would be a treatment for anxiety. Obviously, at a 30C dilution, there's nothing in there, so it won't be any kind of treatment. But yet, this was the kind of thing that Dr. Oz was recommending. So it isn't surprising that physicians are bothered when patients come in with printed out stacks of stuff that Dr. Oz said or recommended. On his show, Dr. Oz interviewed a large number of guests, including Joe Mercola. The man your doctor doesn't want you to listen to, was the claim. And absolutely, they should not want you to listen to him because he is the champion spreader of misinformation. In fact, the New York Times has called him the most influential spreader of coronavirus misinformation online, and they have even taken action against him for his bogus COVID treatments. But every day, Mercola comes out with some new headline about a plot to terminate human life in the next decade, that the vaccine injects microchips into us, and booster lunacy, real fact on this unprecedented experiment. And of course, eventually, what he says that you have to neutralize all of these toxins by taking his products, of which he sells a large variety. Some of the things he says are absolutely bizarre. Remember the episode of Will Smith's slap, which happened during the Oscars, when Will Smith smacked Chris Rock across the face after Smith supposedly took offense over Rock's comment about his wife's lack of hair? Well, according to Mercola, this was all orchestrated because his wife suffered from alopecia areata, a type of baldness, and that Pfizer was marketing a drug to treat alopecia areata, and they were a partial sponsor of the Oscars, and therefore they had concocted this whole thing. He also tells us that the existing medical establishment is responsible for killing and permanently injuring millions of Americans. He, of course, is there to stop all of this killing. And if you just listen to him, you'll get practical health solutions without the hype. This is what he offers. Well, what he offers is opposition to vaccination, fluoridation, dental amalgams, GMOs, mammograms, nonstick cookware, and any kind of public health advice. And then, of course, he markets his products like this organic deodorant. He tells us that indeed his deodorant is not an antiperspirant. It doesn't contain aluminum. And of course, he goes on about how toxic aluminum is when you put it on your skin, which is not true. And he recommends, therefore, his own organic deodorant. I don't know how baking soda becomes organic, but this is what he recommends. But he says that it's not an antiperspirant. It will only destroy some of the odor because sweating is actually good for you. He also, of course, opposes anything that Dr. Fauci has said and claims that he should be fired and arrested. Unfortunately, the way that poor Dr. Fauci has been handled is just a disgrace. He's a champion of science, having published hundreds of reputable papers. Yeah, of course, he made some mistakes. Who doesn't make mistakes? At any given point in life, you just go by the evidence that you have at that point. Hindsight is always 20/20. Anyway, Mercola claims that the vaccine actually induces a disease he calls VAIDS, which is vaccine-acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. This is absolute nonsense. To me, Joe Mercola is really the devil incarnate. Even though, of course, he portrays himself as the champion of the common man, he is not a tool to, the information he provides is not a tool to get him a bigger house and a car or to run for Senate. I fund this site and therefore am not handcuffed to any advertiser, silent part of the corporate parent. Profit generated from the sale of the products that I recommend goes right back into maintaining and building a better site. Well, the site that he's building is in his bank account and his home, which is luxurious. He's become a multi-millionaire. It's not only medical doctors that can go astray. Much to my annoyance, because of my background, is the people's chemist. And yes, chemists can also go astray. Shane Ellison, who calls himself the people's chemist, indeed has a bachelor's degree in biology, a master's degree in organic chemistry. He did work as a pharmaceutical chemist, and then he ditched it all because somehow he saw the light of how we should be living a chemical-free lifestyle. Now, for any trained chemist to use the term chemical-free is insane. Everything in the world is made of chemicals. The only thing that's chemical-free is a vacuum. Then he goes on to tell us that we need to ditch our meds. No more thyroid pills, no antidepressants, no cholesterol-lowering drugs, no more insulin. All you have to do is follow his regimen. Oh, which includes things like raw tea, which is sarsaparilla, and he calls this a testosterone primer. Well, there are some sterols in there, but they're not anabolic steroids, and they're not converted in the body to testosterone. This is just nonsense. He also sells this pre-workout product, faster, higher, stronger, in 59 minutes without chemicals. 59, not 58, not 60, 59 minutes without chemicals. Well, what is in here? Citrulline, tyrosine, hawthorn extract, yerba mate, huperzine A, none of which are documented as energy boosters, but of course they're all chemicals, so calling this chemical-free is once again total nonsense. He also tells us that viruses are not threats, they're part of a healthy immune system, and that big pharma is just an industry that can make and sell vaccines for viruses that don't exist. Well, the COVID-19 virus does exist. So do all the other viruses that we worry about. And no, you cannot protect yourself just by using his supplements, which of course he sells. He tells us that there's nothing scientific about jabbing people with a chemical shitstorm to fight the common cold dressed up as COVID-19. Well, we have ample evidence that the COVID-19 vaccines worked remarkably well in keeping people out of the hospital. No, they did not solve the problem of COVID-19, but they certainly reduced the severity, and they kept people out of the intensive care units. Now, of course, when he says something like this, he feels that he has to back it up with some science. So what he does is show people just what you find in the vaccine, and there are all of these tongue-twisting names that harken back to the food babe, that if you can't pronounce these things, you should not allow them into your body. Well, the chemistry of the vaccine is indeed very complex. There are a number of ingredients in there that allow it to enter a cell so as to try to prevent the spreading of the virus. But it can be very scary when you see all these multisyllabic names which are present in the vaccine. But just like all the multisyllabic names that are present in our food, it doesn't mean that they are dangerous. But then, of course, he will also tell you the alternative, which he's willing to sell. And these are ways to boost the immune system without having to rely on vaccines. And he does try to provide some evidence. And here it is. He tells us that these are chemicals that are adaptogens, that are extracted from particular plants, and that there is evidence of their immune sensitivity. Well, actually, there isn't. When you look at the research that he references, you find that it doesn't say what he says it says. It doesn't say anything about efficacy in terms of the immune system. It says something about the extract being safe in animals, or in this particular case, about the different levels of coriander seed powder that are used in broiler chickens. And they may have some efficacy there in protecting them from bacterial invasion. But this is meaningless in terms of human immune system, for which we would need clinical trials. Have there been any clinical trials for any of the stuff that the People's Chemist recommends? No, there have not been any. And because of this, he indeed has faced a lot of arguments from people. He was banned from Facebook, shut out from PayPal, shadow banned on Instagram, etc. So what did he do? He began printing his own newspaper called Straight Talk that he can deliver, in which he makes the case that Big Pharma is like a shark trying to eat us, and he is the one that can throw us the lifesaver. The fact is that when you replace the People's Chemist by science, then you see that in fact it is he, the People's Chemist, who is the big shark that is trying to feed on us. So I hope I've given you an insight into all of the misinformation, disinformation, and silliness that is out there. And of course, there's always more to come because we're living in the age of data explosion. There are roughly 5 scientific papers published every minute, every single day. It's impossible even to keep up with a small sliver of the information. And analysis lags way behind. We are generating far more data than we have the ability to interpret and analyze. So it is tremendously important to be able to filter, to know what is information, what is misinformation, what is disinformation. But indeed, it's difficult to do that because we need to teach people how to do some critical thinking. Not an easy thing to teach. We've been struggling with this for decades. And Jonathan Swift, the famous English writer, put it very well. Falsehood flies and truth comes limping after it, so that when men come to be undeceived, it is too late. The jest is over and the tale hath had its effect. And we see this in the world of science. Unfortunately, we see it in the world of politics as well. So the challenge is to separate the fact from the myth and to make sure that people understand what is BS out there and what isn't. And this is just what we aim to do through our office here at McGill. And you can check out what we do. There's our website. You can go there and register for our weekly newsletter. And that will arrive in your email inbox every Saturday morning with a bevy of interesting, informative, entertaining information. And we have thousands of articles on our website on virtually everything that you might be interested in. And if you don't find anything, you can always email me. I'm happy to answer your emails. But I think if you sign up for our newsletter, you'll be satisfied and entertained. So thanks very much for the invitation to speak to you here today. It's always a pleasure to speak to an audience where you know that they themselves have a pretty good grasp of what is information, misinformation, and disinformation. So thanks very much. And I don't know if we have any time left for questions, but certainly happy to do that if there is a little bit of time left.
Yes, we have a little bit of time. We have some questions. First off, I would like to point out that you cause me a problem every month in that I contribute to the SciSchmooze newsletter, and I always include one of your videos that I've received over the month. And it's so hard to pick out which one to include. They're all so good and enjoyable.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that in addition to our newsletter, I try to do a couple of short videos every week, which are, again, informative and entertaining. And if you want to get on that mailing list, just send me an email. And I showed you the email address before. It's joe.schwartz@mcgill.ca. And I'll put you on the mailing list so that you can, at least entertain yourself for a couple of minutes, every week with these scientific videos.
Yes, that's true. Oh, Eugenie Scott has a question. The skeptical movement is dispersed across social media, but so are the sites perpetuating pseudoscience. Do you have a feeling regarding the ratio between us and them? Are we par or hopelessly behind?
I think Jeannie probably knows that we are pretty well behind this. I tell you, I do have to give sort of begrudging compliment to some of these pseudoscience people. They're very good at what they do. They know how to make websites and Instagrams and various kind of platforms that are seductive, and they know how to use visuals. They know how to pull in people. I don't know if I can put a ratio on it. I don't know how one would measure that, but I think we're outnumbered. And unfortunately, we often end up preaching to the choir, as I'm afraid I did here today. Because I don't think the Food Babe or Shane Ellison or Dr. Oz are looking at this now.
Okay. Well, Rob Palmer has a question. What mistakes do you believe Fauci made?
I don't think that he made any mistakes given the time at which, the supposed mistakes were said. I mean, in retrospect, maybe that all of the enforced isolation, especially of children who were less prone to getting COVID, maybe that was a little bit overdone. And then, of course, there was the ambivalent information about when to wear masks and when not to wear masks. But I think, he got 99% of the things right. And it's tragic that he has to have security people around him because of death threats that he has had, and the attempts to send him poisonous powders in envelopes. I mean, it's unbelievable. And the questions that he was asked testifying in front of Congress, people like that reprehensible green woman. I mean, I don't even like to mention her name because I don't want people to Google the stuff that she says. I mean, she is just an abomination. She is a wart on the face of science. And for her to say to Dr. Fauci, I'm not going to address you as doctor because you don't deserve that. This is a woman who doesn't deserve to wash his socks. And she is voicing this in Congress, saying that she's not going to address one of the most respected physicians in North America as doctor, and that she's not kicked out from from that assembly at that point. It's outrageous.
Well, this has been a pleasure and a privilege for me today. And thank you very much, Dr. Joe Schwarcz.
Well, it's been a pleasure for me too, to speak to people who appreciate the distinction between all the nonsense out there and the sense.